Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the Artisan Cutlery Centauri pocket knife. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Artisan Cutlery for sending this guy along. That's right, this guy was sent to me directly from the manufacturer for me to take a look at. As always, I told him I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. It might be a gem, might be junk. Nevertheless, we do have to assume this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let this affect the nature or quality of my review, but there you go, full disclosure. Next thing, let's do some size comparison real quick. Here this guy is against the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. So what we can see here is this is actually a substantially large knife here. And here it is against the Spyderco Delica. And actually I'll throw on two other Ray Laconico design knives. One of them knives. Yeah, there we go. This is the Monterey Bay Knives EZC and the EWC and the Monterey Bay Knives EZC down at the bottom here. And so what we can see here is this is substantially larger than a lot of, well, some of Ray's other work. I think it's more in the vicinity. I think he's done some big stuff before. But anyways, there you go. And then finally, a quick note. This is, as I mentioned here, a design by Ray Laconico. Usually he does his stuff up on the blade, but in this case, it's down on the backspace. So we'll talk about that later. But nonetheless, he's a designer you've seen plenty of times before on the channel. And but this is his first collaboration, to the best of my knowledge, with Artisan Cutlery. So anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your Artisan Cutlery Centauri right here. So on the good side, start with, this has a nice clip to it. And it is a good clip in a bunch of ways, but the biggest one is just it's got a good ramp, it's got good flex. It's sort of a very nice functional clip, and it's also relatively long. And I think there's a lot to be said for a nice long clip on a pocket knife, just because it adds a little bit of extra security to the pocket knife. And so I appreciate very much this clip. I think it's done well. Next thing, this guy has a nice little blade to it. It has reasonably thin blade stock. If we compare it here, we are actually, looks to be a little bit thinner than the Spyderco PM2, and it's got a relatively tall grind on there, resulting in an edge that is actually reasonably thin as well. It's not an oh my god scary thin edge, but you know what, it works quite well, and it makes it a reasonable cutting tool. And the blade steel on this guy is, as you might suspect, S35VN, which is a steel that is absolutely good to go. And so I appreciate that very much. Next thing, I do have to say, I appreciate the very subtle use of texture on the backside here. As we can see here, this is not just machined. I mean, it is just machined, but it's nicely machined. Particularly on the handle itself, you can see there's sort of a very subtle pinstriping there. And I understand that's probably just the nature of the finish pass here, but it is subtle, but it's something I do very much appreciate. That's nice. I also must say I appreciate the lanyard hole on this, which is not a hole at all. Instead, it's a little pin that is mounted inside of there that the lanyard can loop around. But the thing is, if you're looking at it from the side, hey, no lanyard hole. That's great. In a world of lazy lanyard holes where it's just like, hey, we stuck a hole in it, I very much appreciate that kind of a hidden sort of thing. Then finally, on the good side, I very often said that, and I think it's completely valid, that Ray Laconico has done a lot of the same knife. He has made a bunch of pocket knives that are substantially identical to one another in a variety of different ways. And, you know, they all tend to look something like this, where they got a groove in the handle, they got a relatively, I mean, the blade shape is, this one is actually a little bit out of his norm. This is a little bit out of his normal style. And especially if you cover up this groove, I don't even know, I might not have called this a Laconico, and so at some level I appreciate that. I appreciate him stepping out a little bit of the, from his comfort zone and doing something a little bit different. That is a beautiful thing. So, there you go. Well, it's a low-flying helicopter. Anyways, sorry about that, folks. This is, that is the good to me, is that it's out of Laconico's normal style. It's got a nice hidden lanyard hole on it. It's got that little bit of texturing on the backside that I think really adds a little bit of something to it. Has a nice blade with thin stock, a thin edge, an S35VN, and a very, very nice clip. On the great side to me is the action on this guy. This has a nice and tall front flipper. This is a front flipper pocket knife. I mean, it's easy enough to open two-handedly. Then again, a lot of knives are, right? But what this has going for it is that it is a front flipper knife. See, you've got this little area here, and if you apply a little pressure with your thumb, the knife comes flying open. It's a little harder to do, a little less natural to do it when you are underneath a phone. Trying not to hit the phone with the knife as it opens there. But I got to say, this was very easy to use. And on the closed side, it's actually pretty damn smooth as well. So the action on this is good to go. And it's well dialed in for the particular front flip and approach that they're taking here. This is absolutely great. And frankly, there aren't that many larger front flippers out there. And so in a lot of ways, I think this is going to scratch an itch for somebody who's maybe got very large hands and maybe just, prefers much larger knives, but wants to get in on the front flipper craze. This is absolutely a really nice option in that way. So to me, at least, that's what's great here, is they've got a nice deployment action with a nice tall front flipper that's really dialed in with a good detent and everything like that at a nice size. On the bad side, one thing I'll say is somebody who generally prefers smaller knives, this knife feels a little bit on the bigger side. People are going to give me crap for saying a 3.5-inch knife is big. At some level, you're welcome to disregard this, but it feels a little bit big. And especially in the handle, it feels very much big. It's kind of a larger knife. And so you do want to keep that in mind if you were looking for a front. And I think the reason this gets to me at all is I actually thought this was a lot smaller. When I asked to check one of these guys out, I had assumed this was coming in around the 3-inch line, and then I got it. It was like, whoa, okay, that's big. They are planning on making a smaller one. This has already been told to me by the Artisan folks, but I think it's on their Instagram and everything like that. But nonetheless, it's a little bit on the bigger side, and it's deceptively large. You might not think it's so big, and I think that's what caught me off guard there. Next thing, I have to say, there were definitely some sharp corners on this guy that I was just feeling. For instance, pretty much every corner on the back of the blade here is sharp. It's not to the... It almost feels like there's a little tiny micro burr or something on there, and you could knock that off with a little bit of filing, or like a little ceramic file or something like that, but it's not super smooth along the back there. And same thing, this little corner of the lock bar here, that's really not ideal. It's not to the point where it's dangerous or problematic so that I would actually call it ugly, but it's definitely a situation, and something I hope they address in future versions. Next thing, I have to say, although it's got a relatively effortless close, there is a level at which it doesn't feel all that smooth. It might, after a while, wear in or something, but yeah, you can hear that. There's a little bit of something going on in there, and I don't even know what it is. Maybe it's the low grit finish on this that's just rubbing against the tent ball. I don't know, but I'm not super impressed by that smoothness, even though in practice it's plenty smooth enough. So it's more of an aesthetic thing than anything. Next thing, speaking of aesthetics, I'm not loving this backspacer. Look, it's fine, but it ends up feeling a little bit wordy, right? And the font is completely uninspired. It's not even Laconico's, the font that he uses on everything. It's just like, oh, we took a random thing and we engraved it on there. And then the dot in the middle there, I don't know. This just doesn't really do it for me. And I actually had a couple of people tell me that they felt the same, that they really felt like this backspacer was a bit of an aesthetic eyesore thing. And so I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. Next thing, not to do a design critique here, and you can see that a lot of my critiques are relatively low-key here. I mean, it's got sharp edges. It's probably the worst thing I can say about it. But honestly, I don't particularly like this swedge either, right? It kind of feels very out of place. Most of the knife is very curvy, and then this is very abrupt, right? It's very... I don't know. So this swedge here didn't really do it for me particularly. I could definitely skip the swedge, and I think the knife would have been a little bit more attractive, and they could have even brought the grind up higher and gone a little bit thinner at the edge. I don't know. That's more of a design thing, but nonetheless, that didn't super appeal to me. So on the bad side, mostly nitpicks here. There were some sharp corners in the lock bar. As well as on the knife itself. The swedge feels a little weird and out of place. Just in general, like I said, a lot more chamfering is needed here. I'm not loving this backspacer particularly. It feels it's smooth in practice, but it's not smooth in handling, if that makes sense. And it's a lot bigger than I expected. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely a situation. So on the ugly front, there's only one ugly issue here, and that to me is the price tag. This guy is coming in on Artisan Cutlery's website at $266. Now, mind you, there were no other retailers selling this at the time that I was filming this, and so what I'm kind of hoping is that this is one of those ridiculously overinflated MSRP prices that nobody is ever actually going to pay, but they have to put it on there so that retailers can put 40% off like it means something. I hope that's what's going on here. But if that is the actual, I could add the card at that price point, so maybe maybe they truly believe that's the price here. Honestly, I don't. At the end of the day, this is an overseas-made S35VN flipper frame lock knife. And, you know, to be fair, I mean, it's a nice piece. There are a lot of things that are done well here, but that is just not unique anymore. And more specifically, a lot of folks, Artisan included, have been doing a lot better than that on pricing. So this is a very much not competitively priced knife out of a company that historically has done a lot of competitive pricing. As I was carrying this guy, so I was using this guy, I was picturing it coming in closer to maybe like 180 or 200. But 266, oy, oy, oy. So if that stays the real price, and I'll try and comment below if I notice that that's actually not the real price. If that's the real price, though, that's way too high. I don't necessarily see that in here, and I think that's going to be a major point where this knife suddenly becomes not that competitive. So to me, at least, that's what's ugly, is that price is just really high. Final conclusion. Look, this is a fine knife. I mean, it's got a nice clip, a nice blade, some nice texturing on the back there. It's got a very nice lanyard approach, and it's got some uniqueness out of Ray with a very nice deployment action. Mind you, it is a little bit big for some. That's maybe more a question of expectations than anything. It's not the smoothest thing ever in terms of like the pure aesthetic of like machining excellent. It has a so-so backspacer design. Some of the design elements are a little bit weird, and it could absolutely use a little bit more chamfering, but the big turd in this guy's punch bowl, honestly, is that price tag. If $266 is the price they expect people to pay, that's kind of rough. This is going to have a lot more competition, not necessarily on the big old front flipper market. There's not that much of that going on. But if you're just trying to sell people another flipper frame lock and S35VN, you're going to have a hard time doing it to me at $266. On the whole, I mean, design-wise, it's fine. It's nice, and I think if you are a person who is looking for a front flipper that is a little bit bigger, this is one of few games in town, so I think it might actually land that way. And it is nice to see a new design, well, maybe not new design, but a slightly different design coming out of Ray. That is something I appreciate. But I think for a lot of folks who are just kind of interested in a pocket knife, the price on this guy is just not super competitive. So I think overall, although the Centauri is a solid little knife, and the small Centauri I think will be a lot more interesting to me, but you know, given that's my own bias, and hopefully the small will be much smaller in price tag as well. If you're loving the design, you're loving the size, and you don't mind paying a little bit much more than it's exactly after there, then I think it's possible that the Centauri could be a star for you, but I'm really hoping they can get that price down, because I think that'll make this journey just a little bit more stellar. Stellar journey. Anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.